Good afternoon. Welcome to Lunch with Books. I'll introduce our guest in just a moment. I wanted to mention that next week in this slot, we have Tina Fagan, who will do a classical piano recital. She's a performer with Pittsburgh Symphony Orchestra, among many other groups, and has been here before with Zafiro Trio most recently. This Thursday on People's University Livestream, The Struggle for Women's Rights, we will continue with Jean Finstein and Judy Hendrickson, who will talk about suffragists here in Wheeling. That will be at 6:30 p.m. Today, if you ask a question during the question and answer period, you'll be entered in a drawing to win one of these, which is our brand new handmade here in Wheeling Lunch with Books soup mug that also works well as a coffee mug, made by East Wheeling Clay Works. Today, our guest is Phillip Greenwalt, who is the co-founder of Emerging Revolutionary War and historian with Emerging Civil War. He is the author or co-author of 5 books, including 3 on the Civil War and 2 on the American Revolution. He graduated with a bachelor's degree in history from Wheeling Jesuit University in 2004 and has a graduate degree in American history from George Mason University. He is currently a supervisory ranger for the National Park Service in Florida and has worked for NPS in some capacity for the last 14 years, including places like Fredericksburg, Spotsylvania, and others. If you have a question, type it in the comments field. Here is Phillip.
All right, well, thank you. Let me get the PowerPoint up here and running. All right, we'll backtrack here. Well, once again, thank you for joining in with Lunch with Books. Today we're going to talk about a single blow, which is a quote from a British officer believing that a single blow would teach the colonists, especially in New England, to adhere more to the royal standard. And so that's why the title Single Blow. These will be the talk about kind of the battles and the movement of Lexington and Concord, which happened in April of 1775. Obviously, most of us are familiar with what we believe the general story about Lexington and Concord, the build-up to the American Revolution. We'll also explain a little bit about the connections of Lexington and Concord, also about what Emerging Revolutionary War is where this book stems from, which is to give you an introduction into this most pivotal period in American history. Let's start off a little discussing Boston. Obviously, Boston is a hotbed of a revolutionary movement. However, most times we believe that 2 singular actions happened. First, the Boston Massacre in December of 1770, and then the Boston Tea Party. What we know about some of these events, of course, have been brought down by history or the retelling of history or the phrasing of history, including a discussion on what the colonists looked like or resembled or dressed up as when they did the Boston Tea Party. The Boston Tea Party, however, they were not dressed as Native Americans or Mohawks. That is actually a conglomerate of stories pieced together in the 19th century to determine what disguises these gentlemen or colonists had when they took over the ships that were sitting in Boston Harbor filled with tea waiting to be unloaded. But obviously the Bostonians were not, and Massachusetts were not eager for that, because that means they would acquisize to the tax on it. But there was a certain limit on how many days the ships could stay in port. And so they were facing that limit or that expiration. So all we know is that they did disguise themselves. They did either blacken their face or put feathers in their caps or did something to smear their identity so that way they would not be recognized. And it was actually a newspaper or a pseudo amateur historian in the 19th century that pieced together newspaper accounts. But there's no primary sources from that time frame that actually says they did dress as Native Americans. It is a protest movement, but it is a very structured and singular protest movement. In fact, when one of the colonists on board actually breaks a lock for a different hold on the ship, colonists will return the next morning with a replacement lock. So that's one of the things there to show that they were very dedicated and very determined just to remove the tea. Now, obviously, the British will have a response to this. There's an escalation of colonial policies. Obviously, there are a bunch of bills that are passed by the British Parliament that is very detrimental, including the closing of the Boston port, which will put a lot of Bostonians out of work. It's also the removal of the colonial government from Boston as well. There's also things that we don't even take into account, some like the Quebec Act, which divorced the part of the colony of Canada, which obviously Americans at that time had and would have in the ensuing war believed that Canada could be the 14th colony. A little bit about Boston. This is one of the maps from the book here. You can actually see what Boston looked like. It is actually less than 1 square mile in 1775. There's somewhere upwards of 12 to 15,000 people in the city of Boston. That does not make it the largest city in the colonies. That actually will be reserved for Philadelphia. We can also see as well, and the lighter gray around is what Boston looks like today. So it has been expanded. So keep that in mind, because if you look through the screen right below Cambridge, there's a place called Lexington Point. Right now, if you do visit Lexington Point, there is a marker, a stone tablet sitting in front of an office building where the British landed late on the night of the April 18th, early in the April 19th, 1775, and it's a few blocks from the water side today. So it seems out of place, but at the time it is on the edge. It is the coastline for Cambridge. Of course, the north there you see Charlestown, Breed's Hill. A little off the map is Bunker's Hill, which would obviously see major fighting later in the summer of 1775. And on the right, one of the things to point out is Long Wharf. That is the main wharf. It's pointed actually directly toward England. And so that's where a lot of the businesses, upwards of, I think, 16 ships could actually load and unload there, which was an amazing number in 1775. A little to the north, Hancock's Wharf, named after that the Hancock family. John Hancock's uncle is the one that's the proponent of it. When John Hancock's father does pass away, his aunt and uncle will adopt him or cater to him. They have no children of their own. And his aunt will be very instrumental in helping John Hancock's image even after he was established as one of those Sons of Liberty and Boston patriots. So what happened? First shots. Obviously, we believe the first shots, the shot heard around the world, as Ralph Waldo Emerson would relate, did not actually happen in those two Massachusetts towns. The first shots of the war actually would happen in New Hampshire there. As you see on the, I guess that's the right as well on your screen, the as colonists, including a guy named Major John Sullivan, who would rise to become a general in the Continental Army, would overtake the guns and stores there of Fort William and Mary in December of 1774. On the left there is Salem, which is better known, obviously, for those witch trials that happened in the century before. However, in a kind of a comical tale, one of the British commanders is informed that he's going to be sent out on an expedition to Salem on a Sunday to gather some of the munitions that the colonists had started to stockpile. They came on a Sunday with the belief that most of the town would be in service listening to sermons. So Alexander Leslie and his men disembarked. They come marching toward the water, similar to what you see behind you. However, the town and water system has changed slightly with canals and so forth. But as they're marching toward it, the British, the colonists, are alerted that the British are approaching, and so they are able to pull up the bridge across the river there. As they do, there's some insults being traded. There's some disturbance, also some confusion, and Leslie's trying to figure out exactly what to do. So it's up to a local preacher who decides that he comes up with a solution. that if the British's orders are to march across the bridge and search the town. However, if they would amend that and say they would march across over 100 paces across the bridge and then turn around and come back, would that fulfill the order for Leslie? And Leslie agrees, says yes, that would fill the order or the letter of his orders. And so the bridge is lowered. The British soldiers march across at 100 paces past the bridge. They stop, turn around, and march back across the bridge, back to their boats, and off to Boston once again. So it is a compromise. So it is quite possible that this bridge in February of 1775, if was not for that one preacher, could have seen the first shots of the American Revolution. Instead, a kind of compromise happened. So the reason I bring this up in a discussion about Lexington and Concord is simply to the fact that the movement toward April 19, 1775 did not happen in a vacuum. It did not just suddenly appear. There was movements, both political, both economic, and then also with these almost first shots and almost Civil War type atmosphere happening, that the colonists started developing, obviously, the Sons of Liberty, the Committees of Correspondence, the Committees of Safety. They created a network of riders that would communicate. So they became a little more organized. They started revamping their militia, development of Minutemen, which we'll talk about here in a second. So it's really just an onward movement, and it actually did start way before the Boston Tea Party, even prior to the Boston Massacre, but that's kind of outside the focus of this book talk today. So there are some great histories talking about how did these guys and gentlemen become revolutionaries, and so I'll definitely recommend taking them out because it fills in the story. So Thomas Gates, one of the most vilified, obviously, in this early period, if you're a pro-patriot leaning sympathizer. But he actually is married to a lady from New Jersey, Margaret Campbell. He's actually very, very, what's the right word? He's trying to do his best to facilitate a peaceful or facilitate a homogeneous type working relationship with the colonists. However, I mean, there are tar and feathering, colonial port collectors. They are ransacking the Thomas Hutchinson's house and destroying residences. They are bringing up protest movements. So it really puts him in a bind. He has to follow, obviously, orders from Great Britain, from Parliament. He is dual role as governor of Massachusetts, but also leading military commander of His Majesty's forces in North America. So he's got that trouble. In addition, he has rebel-rousers like Samuel Adams, John Hancock, and then Dr. Joseph Warren, who are fomenting unrest inside the town. So in April, he hears that there are munitions that are being held in Concord, which is less than 20 miles to the west of Boston. There is a belief that there were 4 artillery pieces, or the cannon tubes, that were secreted out of Boston. That is a blemish on Gage's command. It also does not look good to his superiors that he to notify them that he lost 4 artillery pieces that were basically brought out of Boston underneath his very watch. And so he will order a mixed unit of grenadiers and light infantry to head toward Boston. He sends out a patrol the night before to try to keep word spreading that the British force is moving. However, Warren and other ones do get wind of it. The most famous person to actually ride out that night will be Paul Revere. Obviously, we know him well from Paul Revere's Ride, the poems, engraving. Actually, the initial first one out is a guy named William Dawes, who actually sent by Warren as well. He takes a more roundabout way, and ironically, Paul Revere and William Dawes will meet a Dr. Prescott in Lexington and help spread the word. Now, when William Dawes is sent, he is sent by Warren. Prior to them knowing of the British movement by land or sea, he is sent to believe that maybe John Hancock and Samuel Adams, you see there on the right, are being the target, which they're being Warren and Hancock and Adams are staying the night in the parsonage at Lexington, Reverend Clark's house there. And so Dawes is out with some antiquated information. Revere comes later saying that there are British forces coming and how they are approaching. So Warren, Hancock, Adams, Warren is very instrumental, and he's one of the last of the Sons of Liberty or big patriot leaders that will stay in Boston. If you've not had a chance to read much on Dr. Warren, he is a fascinating, amazing intellectual that unfortunately faces an untimely death at the Battle of Bunker Hill. But he is basically the almost the sole mover and shaker, especially as the other delegates leave to attend the Continental Congress. So we have the word spreading out. The British, a 700-man picked force, the light infantry and grenadiers are some of the best units from their respective regiments. They're also mixed with some Royal Marines as well. John Pitcairn will come out as well. Lieutenant Colonel Richard Smith will be Francis Smith will be the commander of the force. And here's a little bit about those misconceptions again. We always view the British as obviously the biggest, best empire in the 18th century, which certainly they can make the argument for. But a lot of these British soldiers had either been in garrison duty in Ireland, had spent some time in Canada before that, and Halifax, Nova Scotia. And so they had not really seen action. If you think about it, the last major war that the British will fight is the French and Indian War, and that ends in 1763, or the 7 Years' War, as it's known around the world. And so you have 12 years of pretty much garrison duty. And so a lot of these soldiers have joined up in that time frame. So they are part of the British, biggest, best empire in the world, yet at the same time, they are newbies. It's kind of like your Super Bowl team. If you're a football fan and you win the Super Bowl, but the next year they have a whole new starting quarterback or team, yes, technically they are the Super Bowl defending champions, but now they have a whole new cast of characters or players to contend with. In addition, you pulled the light infantry, the grenadiers, these companies from various units. They never worked together. Now you're going to put them into a situation marching out into enemy or perceived enemy or hostile territory. In addition, the notes are, in any military movement, things do not adhere to schedule. So some of the men get across on the Lexington Point, and they stay there for a few hours in the dawn in the muck and swamp of the coastline before they march out. The town people have been notified along the stretch because that system of riders, in addition of besides Paul Revere and William Dawes coming through, they set off a chain reaction. And now you have these men marching out, and some of them do comment that there are a lot of quietness along the route. A lot of the buildings and houses are shut up, and the shutters are pulled and so forth. So they're heading out into this area where they're going to face the conglomeration of Minutemen and militia. And so technically Lexington, the first town, did not have a Minuteman company. These are men that are supposed to be ready in a minute's notice. So most of them are militia. And John Parker is the militia commander for the Lexington militia. And the picture to the left of the statue, it sits right in front of Lexington Green for those who have not had the opportunity to visit this part of Massachusetts. To the right is most of them gathering there in front of one of the historic homes. And so what you have is the cry goes out as soon as Paul Revere arrives in the middle of the night at the parsonage there in Lexington. The militia have been guarding, some of them have been guarding the house as well. Revere gets an audience with Hancock and Adams after Hancock pledges that Revere is a known seller because actually the guard on Sergeant Monroe would not let him through. And so after that is determined, the militia is called out, but then nothing happens. And so they do take time. Some go home if they can be called back if they're close by. Some go over to Buckman's Tavern, sit near the hearth, warm themselves up, maybe imbibe in a drink or two. And then here comes the British marching out in the early morning hours. And so if you're heading toward this monument there, statue in Lexington Green, the road goes to left or right. Unfortunately, there is a very senior officer, Jesse Adair, a lieutenant, who is a little bit of a hothead, and he leads the men down the wrong path, which puts them into a confrontation with the militia. At that time, in the early morning hours of April 19th, the militia under John Parker, obviously he says if they meant do not fire first, but if they meant a war, let it begin here. We're not sure if he actually said that comment. In addition, why would he want to start a war in the middle of his own town, especially with a lot of his men without with their homes, their livelihoods, their families nearby? So in this conversation, as the British deploy into a little bit of a line from column to line, a shot is fired. Now, to this day, who knows exactly who fired that shot? Was it a militiaman? Was it a British soldier that was nervous? Was it an accidental gunshot that went off? Was it one of those militiamen from Buckman's Tavern that thought he was safe from a window firing a pot shot at the British? No matter what happened, there is the initial engagement, and a few of the militiamen are killed or mortally wounded before Major John Pitcairn can come up and stop the action from happening. One of these gentlemen, Josiah Harrington, actually, there's another story account. We're not sure how accurate it is, but he does get mortally wounded and supposedly crawls back where he dies on his own doorstep. And the house is there by Lexington Green today for you to visit if you so soon. So they're coming out. The British now have fired. They're on the way to Concord. You have the British regulars. This is one of the stones here that where some British soldiers are buried. This is on the return trip when it becomes the Battle Road, the 12 miles or so intervening that the British will face or run a gauntlet. And if you look behind the background of this PowerPoint, it's actually a view down the Battle Road, which is preserved by Minutemen National Historical Park in Massachusetts, and is a great venue to walk, bike, and discover history. But here they come into the Battle of Concord, and this map gives you a view of what happened. There's the Concord River running kind of from the top right down through. You can see how it breaks off. There's a Sudbury River, the Azabet River, both go in. In the middle of the picture, you can make out the word North Bridge. There's also a South Bridge that's farther down. The British will come in on the right, head into the town. The militiamen and Minutemen will come up. You see the word training field, Major Buttrick's house, Barrett's Mill, corner James Barrett is the commander of the local militia at a Concord. And so they are headed out to that area of Colonel Barrett's farm. So Captain Laurie and company goes out to look, about 30-some men. What they don't realize is that Barrett has received the word. So him and his sons, his family, will actually bury some of the tubes and ammunition and other military accoutrements in their farm fields, plow it over. What's surprising is that this late in April that they are plowing fields. The British do not discover that or think about it. In addition, the rest of the British forces, some will detail down to the South Bridge, some will hold the North Bridge to keep Captain Laurie's force safe, so they have a return track that's open because now shots have been fired, militia are present. In fact, one of the ironies of it is that actually a militia will lead the British into Concord, kind of playing music as well. And so you have this kind of uneasy atmosphere happening here in Concord. The British will start to empty some of the provisions. They'll start throwing the bullets into the pond there in the middle of the town. You see that now by Wright's Tavern, the meeting house, that water right there. Although that is actually against the orders from Gage to Smith. He wanted them to be able to wreck the military supplies by throwing musket balls into the water. All the Concordians did afterwards was scoop it out, and they had musket balls. But they do take the carriages for the guns. They do chop down the Liberty Pole there in Concord. And so they will start actually a bonfire. They're going to burn this stuff. It's all wood, and the gun carriages, maybe possibly part of the Liberty Pole. And so as they do, the flames actually, one of the sparks kicks over onto one of the houses and starts burning the house. The British will actually stack arms, the soldiers do. They will create a bucket line and start assisting whatever civilians are left in the town to put out the fire. However, up on Punkatasset Hill, north of the training ground, up in that area, militiamen have gathered from the towns of Acton and some from Lincoln and Concord, and there's a group of them there, numbering in the hundreds. And so they see this smoke, and one of the militiamen will actually tell John James Baird, "Are you going to let them burn the town down?" And that kind of promotes an action. And it promotes a movement. And so as they come down off the training field, and on this day, April 19, 1775, this is where, and there's a marker there, that the first organized American military force will take the field under a command structure in following orders. And so you can possibly trace the formation of the United States Army to this day, April 19, 1775. As they get down to the North Bridge, the British will try, the company there will retreat across the bridge. They will form a street fighting where you have the first line kneel down, the second line will fire over top of it, and they will try to keep in a rolling fire. Shots are fired initially, and so and one of the first shots unfortunately hits Isaac Davis, the captain of the Acton militia, killing him instantly. He had actually rode away, and his wife, he will say that he had this look. He turned around on his horse that morning as he rode from Acton to Concord, and the look passed between them, she said, was the final look they ever saw, but it was like he wanted to say something, but didn't. So the word was his eyes, his motion, his view, the viewpoint of both of them was that this would be a momentous day. And so Isaac Davis, unfortunately, would be one of the first men to fall here at the Battle of Concord. The Continental or the Colonial Militia Minutemen return fire. They push across the North Bridge, which pushes the British back towards the town. At that point, Lieutenant Colonel Smith will ride out. He will try to organize defense, and in the ensuing time, unfortunately, one of the British soldiers will be tomahawked by a gentleman who is believed to be disturbed in the head, using the phrase of the time. But it sets in this rumor into the British lines that the Americans are taking no prisoners, and it sets the scene for what unfolds next. So this is the view. To the right is the North Bridge, the reconstruction there. Every year they do have a reenactment. You can walk across the bridge. The monument to your the foreground there. You can head up the hill. This second picture, the one on the left with the marker and the flag, is the field where they muster in. It's also right in front of the visitor center for the national park there. And so this is the muster field where that force that constitutes the first organized military force in for America will take place. So April 19, 1775, obviously they walk by, as they head to the North Bridge, they walk by the Emerson House, the grandfather of Ralph Waldo Emerson, who is a reverend as well as Ralph, that writes the famous poem, The Shot Heard Around the World. What that kicks off, as you see on this map, is a long, perilous trek back for the British forces as they head back toward Boston. They first have to clear Miriam's Corner, which is a little to the east of the town of Concord. Colonial militia can on top of the hill and fire down onto the road. They then get around farther around Hartwell Tavern. There's right next to the word Smith. There's a bloody angle where the road bends, and there is open fields. The colonial militia are starting to gather. There are ones coming in from all different types of towns, and you can see some of them listed here: Stoneham and Woburn, Waltham, Watertown, and Lincoln. And so as they do, they push in Smith's forces back. You can see toward Lexington, outside the town of Lexington. Recent archaeological surveys have shown that Captain John Parker's militia will, of course, exact revenge, but they don't do it from the position located years and years. They actually do it from farther over, which gives them a more concealment. So if you haven't been to Minuteman National Historical Park and haven't been in the last few years, it's definitely worth a visit back to see just this new placement of where Captain John Parker's company actually was of a militia, not where they believed they were for many, many decades. And they push them right to the outside of Lexington, where you see another name emerge. That's Percy. Lord Percy will bring reinforcements, including an artillery piece. And what they do is as the British are leaving Lexington, they're becoming more and more ragged. Smith has been wounded. The forces are scattering. Men are dying. Men are being shot. Men are being, it's almost like a continuous ambush along a long stretch. And when we see this force, unidentified force marching toward them, initial belief obviously is that there's more militia arriving. Instead, it is British reinforcements. And one of the mishaps of the day, the orders for reinforcements to arrive will actually head to the British commander's Pitcairn unit or headquarters, where he spend the night. Obviously, Pitcairn has left already, so the order sits there. There's a little bit of lag time, but Percy arrives in time to buttress the failing British, who are moving back in a harried expense. And then you see a running fight in the town of Minutemen or Arlington today, outside of Boston. You see some of the most severe street fighting, and it comes into almost a complete shambles for the British there. They are starting to lose command and control. These British soldiers have been harried for miles. They've been up for almost 18 to 20 hours. They're tired. They're hungry. They're being pot-shotted from. And so in Cooper Tavern, you see them kill two innocent Massachusetts civilians. Jason Russell at the Russell House will barricade his house and literally defend his home and hearth. There's bloodletting there. Jason Russell will be killed. The house is preserved today. There's a 76-year-old gentleman, Whitehorn, who will take his musket, will snipe a few British soldiers, will start defending one of the hillsides. He is wounded multiple times and survives another about a decade and a half from his wound. So there's a marker there for the 70-year-old, I think 72. And so Minutemen is really where a almost emergency happens for the British as they're headed back. And it's really a scene of a lot of the death and destruction that happens there at the retreat. So the British will make it back to Prospect Hill. Luckily, Percy will go across, not down through Cambridge and that way, but head toward Charlestown. The safety of the British guns there, the warships that are patrolling the water and the bay and the harbor. And so that ends the day there in Massachusetts on April 19th, 1775. The first shot heard around the world. This is obviously a view of the famous ship, the Constitution, there in Boston Harbor, which you can still visit today. They do a great job of keeping programs there. The U.S. Navy sits right outside the national park. But what you have is the kind of what happens next. Militiamen will arrive from all over the place to ring a kind of siege of Boston. Dr. Joseph Warren and others will get a bunch of correspondence, a bunch of testimonials together. They, in one of the first major PR campaigns, they're able to get a packet of information to Great Britain to be published in the newspapers there before Gage's official report arrives. So it kind of shapes the public perception of what happened on April 19th. Gage obviously tries to downplay it as much as possible, just a simple affair. However, the first shots have been fired. So it is a momentous day that does swing the sound from this is a war of words to a war of bullets. And so what you have is a Rubicon being crossed that later on, of course, John Adams uses those same words referring to the river north of Rome that Julius Caesar crosses when they do sign the Declaration of Independence. But you have casualties, just to give you an idea, 49 colonists, Minutemen and militia will be killed, 39 are wounded, 5 are missing. For the British, you have over 70 killed, 174 wounded, and a little over 25 and 26 being missing. So you have this momentous day, April 19th, the shot heard around the world, although that is not exactly a primary or source at the time. But you have this single blow that the British thought they were going to strike, which does not happen, and precipitates another 8-year conflict in the United States, which leads to the formation of the United States of America. So what happened on Lexington and Concord are very important, obviously, to the American Revolution. Once you peel back some of those myths and visit the sites and start learning the names that have unfortunately been lost to history, from even guys like Dr. Warren down to Jason Russell to the Colonel James Barrett to John Parker, even William Dawes, what went on and the organization, the response, and even from the British side, reevaluating Thomas Gage and John Pitcairn and Lord Percy and other ones that played a major role. That you can learn a lot more about what actually happened, and that is part of the reason we wrote A Single Blow, to get people familiar with the story and peel back some of those myths and legends that have come up. One of the things I like to point out, we always in history are connections, and this is pretty interesting. The 6th Massachusetts, obviously, are the Minutemen of 61 is what they refer to themselves. They're the unit that will go through Baltimore in April of 1861. They will actually name one of the companies the Davis Guards in honor of Isaac Davis, who's killed at the Battle of Northbridge on April 19th, 1775. They actually go through in April of 1861, which obviously is the anniversary of the engagement. These men are raised from Lexington and Concord. Soldier to the left is one of the ones that will be killed by pro-secessionist rebels, pro-secessionist Baltimoreans in Baltimore there. So one of the connections there. So for you to visit Concord, you can see some not only Rebel War history, but a connection to the Civil War. Even more important is the connection to the Concord Six, who helped fund John Brown in 1859, who tried to lead a slave insurrection in Western Virginia, not West Virginia yet there, but in Harper's Ferry. And so connection there to the Minutemen of 61. So it's an interesting story, connecting even how history overlaps. Just an idea of Battle of Baltimore, where they went through, if you're familiar with the city, marching from President Street to Camden, which is now the home of the Baltimore Orioles. And I am a Baltimore Orioles fan, so I'm one of the last ones probably to admit that. But it is a action where they had to actually detrain from one, march across the town, and retrain. And that's where the along Pratt Street is where the mob accosted the last few companies of the 6th Massachusetts, including some of the probably grandsons of those militiamen that fought on April 19th, 1775. To end here, before we do coming down near the end here to do some questions, is what is Emerging Red War? It's a public history-oriented platform. You see there. But the co-founder is Robert Orrison. Please do not mention to him that I snuck this photo into the PowerPoint, but that is him taking a selfie with one of the monuments there in Cambridge, where we were touring sites of where some of the militia, and especially the Continental Army, they would house along at the one university there. I think it's called Harvard. You might have heard of it. But our goal is to promote this history, is to show people where this founding era happened, and to get people connected to the site. So if you are interested in joining the blog, just Google Emerging Red War. We're trying to get a bunch of notices or post up, reviews, etc. But we're always just interested, like someone's doing here, in conversations with authors, with historians, with other history enthusiasts, just to continue to promote the sharing and knowledge. And so, and it's on top of that as well, this is obviously the blog, what we do. So we do every colonial, American Revolution, War of 1812. Here to topics for general audiences, promote the interest. We also try to do book reviews and also weekender posts, so we can highlight some of these places. Behind there is the other visitor center for Minuteman National Historical Park. So it's definitely worth a visit to go as these visitor centers begin to reopen in this COVID pandemic. But it is a very well preserved park. So if you've not been, I highly encourage you to get out and share and enjoy this Revolutionary War history. But for the time being, these are actually the book series. You see the one farthest to the left, yours truly, and Robert Orrison, Lexington and Concord, Battle of Trenton, Princeton, Monmouth, and Kings Valley Fords are the four that are out or about to come out in this series. They are introductory books. They are designed to be that to turn that grass field you see into hallowed ground again, and to get you to see the sites each one has walking tours or driving tours so you can have directions and a little bit of guidance on what you're seeing when you get to these spots. So with that, I'll stop sharing so I can see the screen again there. And so, I switched my screen on. Great question. Thank you, Susan. So sorry that I'm a little muffled. I hope I got a little better. So there are approximately 700 British soldiers that will go out in the approach. So they do send out a decent force of soldiers that will head out. It is always hard to predict how many American colonial militiamen were there. Their numbers range because you have them coming and going all day, few hundred at one time at Concord, and throughout the rest of the experience. You're looking at numbers, about a little less than 100 are killed, wounded, or missing for the colonial militia. So estimates range, altogether probably 500,000 maybe, but not at one time. They're spread along the road, or they're at Lexington or they're at Concord, or et cetera. So, hope that answers that question. Yes, American Spring is a great book. It's one of the ones that we actually recommend in the back. It's also there's a series of books too by a guy named his first name is escaping me, but Beck is his name. He writes Derek Beck, Igniting the American Revolution, The War Before Independence is the two sets. Great books there. Obviously, Paul Revere's Ride by the great historian David Hackett Fisher. And of course, The Road to Concord, How Four Stolen Cannon Ignited the Revolutionary War. There's a gentleman named J.L. Bell. J.L. Bell, who actually wrote the foreword for our book. He has a great blog called Boston 1775. So if you have any history you want of the Boston era, his is the one I highly, highly recommend. Compare British and American weaponry early on. Okay, the British will primarily march with what's referred to as the Brown Bess, is a smoothbore musket that packs a heck of a punch. The Americans will have a conglomerate of weaponry. Of course, they have some have the rifle, which is of course a grooved barrel. They're longer the load, but they're more accurate. Obviously, used better for hunting and so forth. Pennsylvania, Kentucky long rifles, the nicknames for some of them. The British obviously are trained to fire in mass. The Brown Bess is not highly accurate, but a large amount of people firing in line, 100 yards or so, could really cause some devastation. They're also easier to load. You can put a bayonet on them. So the Americans will come with whatever they've got handy around the house. So they're designing their rifles, muskets, where the British will primarily have the Brown Bess musket, which is the standard item or weapon of choice for the British for a number of years. I think also to the Napoleonic Wars, but don't quote me on that exactly. In addition, obviously, I mentioned the word light troops. They're kind of formed by actually the Howes. We know William Howe, the brother Richard Howe, they both fight in the American Revolution. They're in charge of the Army and Navy, especially during the New York campaign. There's another brother, Robert Howe, who's actually killed during the French and Indian War. He's actually honored by New England colonies. They actually give money to create a statue for him. The Howe brothers are very sympathetic to that. But it's the William Howe, I think, creates the formation of the light troops that can move quickly after they saw what happened with the French and Indians during the war in the 1750s, 1760s. That's where the term light troops come from. They're the ones that stand out. They're kind of the flankers or the scouts or the ones that can spearhead things. The grenadiers are the late term that still is referred to when you had strong, tall men that moved forward, and they used to put the old precursor to the grenades, try to blow up the masonry walls and forts and castles and so forth. So the term just stuck around grenadiers there. Any other questions that come up?
Well, give people a minute. Bill, thanks for a great presentation. Let's see if there are any more questions. Otherwise, given that there were only 2 people in the contest, I'm going to send them each the soup one. So, Carol and Susan, thank you for participating. You saw you can get the book at Savas Beatty. I'm sure you can get it at any of the usual outlets as well, right, Phil?
Yes, yeah. I mean, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, all carry it.
Yeah.
Anything. So.
All right. Well, really appreciate you taking the time to present today, and we hope to have you back someday when we can do this at the library where it's where everybody prefers to be.
I appreciate it. Thanks, Sean. I have to thank John Eric as well, who made the connection. But it's always great, even if I virtually, to get back to the Wheeling area. So I look forward to coming back in person one time.
You're not getting off that easy. I see a Second Amendment question.
This is so much. Okay. So, yes, there's a great question. So, yeah, there's a militia, so a well-regulated militia. The belief, obviously, come from the French and Indian War, and forward, then you look at, especially in the American Revolution, there's a big movement that we are against the standing army. The British had a military force. They closed down in 1763, what's called the Proclamation of 1763, which stops westward migration to try to keep the Native Americans and colonial settlers separate. Unfortunately, that's a lot of what the colonial militia were paid for. Instead of money, they were paid with land grants and so forth, including George Washington. And so you have these men that are that have to defend home and hearth, and it's not a figurative term; it's literally defend home and hearth. And so when the American Revolution comes around, you see this idea that the militia are the ones that fight at Lexington and Concord. The militia are the ones that initially besieged Boston. And so there's a big belief in the Continental Congress not to have a standing army. And George Washington and other ones will fight that motion, because how do you defeat the British with trying to raise forces every year? I mean, you're fighting the biggest, best military in the world, and you're training men that at 1 year go home. And so after the war, we always had this belief of how this nostalgic view of how we won the revolution. It is militia coming out to defend and then go home. One of the formations of West Point by Thomas Jefferson, the third president of the United States, was to train a cadre of military officers that in time of war could then go fan out into the local population and raise these militia. So it was a belief that, yes, without a standing army, that a well-regulated militia could maintain the peace and order of the areas, and that's why it's built into the Bill of Rights. Also, that most of these men would have had a musket or rifle on their day-to-day life, hunting or defending as they move into the frontier. So that idea of the American, the Over Mountain Boys, or Daniel Boone or Davy Crockett, kind of this militia that would respond to any emergency, did come from the American Revolution, French and Indian period, and kind of was the formation initially of why we developed West Point, and obviously made it into Bill of Rights because it was a cheaper, easier option than trying to continue to have a standing army, especially with a lot of Americans still wary about the British army that was garrisoned in the towns. One of the intolerable acts is the Quartering Act, which said that British soldiers could be quartered in your own house if there were no public facilities available, and that resisting that, you would be actually arrested or fined. So yeah, the militia was a way to get around those kind of the sore feelings of the British Army being garrisoned in these towns or possibly in your houses. So, great question. Wondering if we'd get something along that line. So, I hope I answered as diplomatically as I could there.
Very good. Well handled. And I see that your friend and our friend John Eric has asked the question, so I'll put it up on the screen.
Can we get any LWB book on Get to Work Greenwalt? I was waiting for you, John Eric, to help co-write that one. We're actually a little farther out, but John Eric probably doesn't know this yet, but we do have a gentleman named Eric Sterner. He actually has a book out coming this fall from the Journal of American Revolution on the Manhattan Massacre, but he's writing one on George Rogers Clark and his campaigns in the West. So we don't have one specifically on Ohio on the frontier, but we do have one coming out in the next few years on a little farther out the Western campaign. So, but we're always looking, John Eric, for an author that helps contribute. If you ask the question, we're going to come around to you to see if you want to be part of it. So, as they say, if you complain, you got to find a solution. But if you ask that type of question, you got to help write it. So,
no, please don't expand his ego anymore. I do thank you for making a connection. He's helped us find a lot of a great presenters. So,
okay.
Here's the last question. I think we'll end on this one.
Having dated a Marblehead, are they very strong? I mean, I've not, I can't really speak directly to it, but I would give them emphasis that they have a right to say that. It is, John Glover, who is a Marbleheader himself, he saves Washington's army at the battles in New York by ferrying them across the river. He's also the ones in charge of ferrying the army across at the Delaware for the battles of Trenton and Princeton. There are actually, commissioned privateers that come out of Marblehead and the Massachusetts coast. So it is quite possible that, they can claim unofficially that they helped start the U.S. Navy. And if not, they also can help claim they saved the American Army, kept the Revolution alive. So one of those other unsung heroes is John Glover. And if you have time to read about the battles in New York, he is the one that ferries soldiers across. He also makes a great appearance in that movie, The Crossing, on I think Chuck Daniels, how John Glover plays there. Definitely. It is, I wouldn't say commonly agreed on, but it is known of their importance in creating a Navy and a privateer. And so maybe it's expanded a little bit by, as you said, headers, Marble headers, but they definitely have a little bit of, as you say, fire with that smoke there.
All right. Bill, we'll let you off the hook now. Thanks very much again for great.
Yeah, thank you.
And we'll see. Thanks everyone who attended today, and we'll see you next week for Tina Fagan's piano recital. Have a nice day, everyone. Take care.